But as you were saying, in the first century, the cultures are intermingling, coming closer
Exactly.
together. So let's go back to the first century and see just yet another example of how close, how very close. So going from Josephus again, concerning the gods, the Greeks consider some to be under the earth, some to be in the sea, and the ancientest of them all to be bound in Tartarus. So Josephus also knows this idea and reproduces it. Very interesting. And then Plutarch, um, a Roman Greek, also gained Roman citizenship like Josephus, also mixing cultures here. Those that burnt his body, talking about some people who committed crimes, or maybe gods, I can't remember actually, probably gods in this case, are even till this time severely tormented in the deepest pit of Tartarus. So we find this idea widespread across Jewish literature, Greek literature, Roman literature, in the same type of terms. Um, it is definitely a drawing closer, I would say. And then I just wanted to add this here too. Um, Polybius, who wrote a history of the Roman Republic, a Greek writer, he said, "A scrupulous fear of the gods is the very thing which keeps the Roman commonwealth together. Wherefore, to my mind, the ancients were not acting without purpose or at random, when they brought in among the vulgar those opinions about the gods and the belief in the punishments in Hades. Much rather do I think that men nowadays are acting rashly and foolishly in rejecting them." I think this is really interesting because you could read a statement like this at almost any time period in history.
Mm-hmm.
People saying, are there really these punishments in hell or in Sheol or however you're going to understand it, or Tartarus? Um, and some people are going to say, well, even if there aren't, they're a good motivating factor to help people behave well and to keep the country together. You need religion as this glue to keep the country together. But since we're talking a little bit about the Roman period, and Josephus belongs very much to the Roman period, became a Roman. A lot of these Greek writers also belong to the Roman period. First century is kind of um, dominated in many ways by the Roman Empire. Cindy, maybe you can just bring us a little bit up to date with the geography in terms of the Roman period, especially the first century. I mean, what's going on? What's a little bit different from what you told us before about just the overall general Mesopotamian, Near Eastern, Mediterranean mindset?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, and yes, this is going backwards from where we've been, but to recontextualize on the map, if we go back and think about that Fertile Crescent area, the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea to the Nile River, this if that was that physical context for so long, through the Hebrew Bible, it's those nations that are interacting with each other, and then maybe even facing a little bit more to the east. They don't have very much Western connection. Even the shipping that they're doing along the Mediterranean Sea is going north and south, maybe hitting Crete. We get some artifacts from Crete that are coming into this Fertile Crescent area, but not much further west than that. Um, there's always, I mean, there's all kinds of examples that break the rule that I just said, but I would say in general, we have a sharing of culture, of ideas, of origin stories, of mythology, all of that's happening within this Fertile Crescent. Alexander the Great is the one who breaks that. So Alexander then coming, yeah, from, yep, that northern region of what we now call Greece. Um, when he brings Hellenism into this Fertile Crescent part of the world, it's a massive shift and change of everything historically, the people groups who lived in the Fertile Crescent. It changes everything about how they perceive the world, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of goods. So that I would say Alexander the Great is one of the biggest like time changers, history shifting people, because he breaks open this Fertile Crescent, this ancient Near Eastern world. He breaks into it. And so now all of a sudden, there's a big face to the West. And then, especially as Rome takes over from Greece, we just have a centering of politics, of world domination that is surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, so including northern Africa. So it's just everything on this map, right, just becomes the primary focus, and the center of this shifts away from the Fertile Crescent and over into Rome ultimately. Now, that doesn't ignore the continued development of people off to the east. And this is where, we'd have to keep pushing even further into history. I mean, there are so many interesting developments where these other people groups to the east, so off the right hand side of the map, continue to develop, but they're holding on to their eastern roots. And as they get larger and push onto the map, what's pictured on the map, and as Rome is continually trying to push east, we're going to get that rub of cultures that happens, which is once we get into the Byzantine world, we start to see a lot of that shift and rubbing quite a bit. But just to kind of even just say, with the entrance of Greece and then the entrance of Rome, the shift of everyone who lives in this part of the world is shifting towards the West even more. And that includes the development of ideas of understanding of the world, of the shape of the world, of the gods, the underworld. All of those ideas are starting to blend.
So is Israel kind of in the middle again? Judea, Israel. How does it fit
Yeah.
in?
Yeah. I mean, to say in the middle is making it too big. I
Hmm.
mean, in the middle in terms of, I would say by the time we get to Rome, when Rome is in charge, the area of Israel, this like the middle part of that Fertile Crescent, right? This is contested land, and continually being passed between like the generals. Alexander the Great, when he dies, his generals fight over it. Rome comes in and establishes control right there in that part of the world. Rome is going to lose a lot of land further to the east. And so this land of Israel ends up being almost on the frontier. The area of the Decapolis cities, those 10, probably more, but the 10 cities are built to be a strong Roman presence on the far eastern edge of their empire, holding these other eastern people, the Parthians, at bay. So they're not really in the middle, but they do sit on land that is still being contested, and it's significant land because of the trade routes. So, you don't have air travel, so everything travels through water and on land, and all of the crossroads for all of those routes are in this land of Israel, which makes it really significant land, which means it was just constantly getting clobbered by anyone who wanted to dominate this part of the world.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get the annotations off here. Just give me a moment. Ooh. Um, yeah, so it's fascinating how there. I know you talk about this in your course, but how this land of the Bible is seemingly always at the crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's Egypt and Mesopotamia, or Greece and Persia, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
somehow these civilizations are interacting almost through the land of the Bible.
Right.
But I'll just refer people to your courses maybe for that.
Right.
We should probably wrap up sometime soon. Let's maybe make a few final comments. Um, I just wanted to mention again that, of course, the Romans, as they took over the Mediterranean world and developed their civilization, incorporated ideas from Greek literature, they synthesized the Greek gods with the Roman
Mm-hmm.
gods, and therefore all of these ideas that we've been looking at in Greek literature or Jewish Greek literature were well understood in the Roman or Latin world as well. And here's just one example from Ovid. The ancients, for and I here is Janus, the Roman god of beginnings and endings, seen looking forward and backwards, am an antiquity. So already they're looking back at, what the ancients did. We think of them as the ancients, but they had other ancients long
Mm-hmm.
before them. So the ancients called me chaos. That's the Greek term. So they're synthesizing these two views of how the world came about. Then it goes on talking about, how the earth came to be, the different elements, and what happened as they changed. So we can see like this intentional effort, and how in the first century across the Greco-Roman world these ideas would have been understood. And maybe we could just close with this slide and then see if there are any final questions that we'll consider. But this is also from Enoch, and I just want to mention that on the faculty of the Israel Institute of Biblical Studies, we have Dr. Maria Chrysovergi, who has written as her master's thesis. She has a PhD thesis as well, but on a different topic. Her master's thesis was actually on afterlife and immortality in the books of Enoch. So Enoch is Jewish Greek, Jewish literature, Jewish apocryphal literature, preserved in Greek and other languages, and we've cited this first Enoch text already in a few instances, but here's another passage from it. It says, "Then I went to another place, and it was deep and dark to look at. Raphael, one of the holy angels, said to me, 'These beautiful corners are here in order that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble into them. They are created so that the souls of the children of the people should gather here.'" And I think in this picture, in this vision, there were four corners, maybe slightly different, but they were actually beautiful corners in Hades, where the spirits of the souls of the dead are assembling, like Nick was saying earlier, being kept in waiting. Um, we can't deal with all of the questions now. Maybe we'll have a follow-up session to deal with what happens after this sort of collection of all of the different souls. Um, but Nick, I just wonder if we can go back to that earlier point that you were making about how uh, Jewish writers of the time saw the underworld, or what happened to people after they died. Because we've had, even after we've said a whole bunch of things, some of which may be new to people, some of which may be familiar. I see some questions like, well, does it mean that when you go to Sheol, you're separated from God? Um, well, we had, and if so, wouldn't that be like hell rather than, just a neutral thing? We had a couple verses about that at the very beginning. Um, but I think a text like Enoch, where it's this vision, an angel guiding him and showing him like all these other realms, really brings home how people of the time would have perceived what was going on. So maybe you just have a few final comments returning to that idea.
Sure. Yeah. So right. So we get this angel kind of walking Enoch through these views of the afterlife. So it's really important. I mean, Josephus says the same thing as we saw towards the beginning of our meeting, is that angels are there and they're sort of like guardians over people. And if angels are there, that means God is there too, because the angels are God's messengers. In fact, in Hebrew, that's what angel means. Malachim in Hebrew means messengers. Um, and then it gets translated into Greek as angelos, which is where we get our word angel. But try not to think in terms of halos and wings. These are messengers of God, and there's a very blurry line between the messenger and God. Now, so for example, in Exodus chapter 3 and 4, Moses is at the burning bush. He turns aside to see this thing, this strange thing, and it says that the angel of the Lord called to him out of the bush. The Malach Hashem called to him out of the bush. And then it says in the very next sentence, and the Lord spoke to Moses from the bush. That is, there's a very, very nondescript line, if any, between the Malach Hashem, the angel of the Lord, and God. So it's very important that first Enoch doesn't see Sheol as a godless place. We saw in the Psalms, if I go up to heaven, you reign in heaven. If I make my bed in Sheol, that is when I end up down there one day, behold, you're there. And so it's absolutely not a separation from God, nor is it a separation from, good biblical figures. For example, Shai, you mentioned early on Luke chapter 16, which is the the story of Lazarus and the rich man. Well, the Lazarus and the rich man, the rich man, they both die. The rich man ends up in Sheol, and so does Lazarus. It's just that the rich man ends up in a bad neighborhood, and Lazarus ends up in the quote bosom of Abraham. Bosom of Abraham language is going to be later used by the rabbis to just talk about a peaceful and wonderful place to be after you die. So that is it's Luke is also the only gospel writer who has that story of the one of the thieves next to Jesus. Jesus is dying on the cross, as is this thief, and he says, today, Jesus says, today to the thief, you'll be with me in paradise. Paradise is a loan word into Greek, but the point is that you're not going, Josephus says it's dark, right, and dank, but it's not a place bereft of God, and often it can be paradisical depending on the neighborhood that you're in. And so, again, so the passage is right here, but yeah, is there something specific you want me to point out, Shia?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say that it's very, very similar in the Enoch texts, where there are these pleasant corners of Hades.
Yeah.
And then there's also a place of torment that he sees in the same vision, kind of the same general geography, if you will, not exactly the same place, but like a part of that place or something like that. And then here too, in Luke, he's in Hades. Again, it's using the Greek term, of course, probably referring to Hebrew Sheol. But as we've seen, they're very similar concepts in certain respects. But writing in Greek, using the word Hades, he raised his eyes, being in torment, and saw, Abraham far away, Lazarus in his bosom, so in this pleasant place. But they can see each other. So they're in the same general area,
Right.
but there's also a chasm. Like there are divisions within this Hades or this Sheol. There are different corners, if you will, to use the Enochic language,
Right.
so that those who want to go over from here to you can't. So you have to stay in your own corner of Hades. Is
That's
one
right.
is one view that was common in the first century, at least.
Yes.
And there are more pleasant corners and less pleasant corners of Hades. So
Exactly.
two-part question, and Cindy, you can jump in here if you want as well. I mean, what is that all about? Why are there, if everyone goes there, why is there, and it's before the resurrection, before the great judgment, why is there already this kind of division, chasms, and so forth? And secondly, Anna had asked this question before the session as a by email, preliminary question, and many people have asked it tonight as well. Is Sheol / Hades like purgatory?
Mm.
This Catholic view.
Yep. Uh, I'm happy. I'm happy to continue to hold forth on this, Cindy. I don't. I also want to. If you've got something hey, let me just say something really quick. I'll take the purgatory question and then say a couple more things about Luke 16. Purgatory. Let's just say this: the Catholic notion of purgatory is built on the idea of Hades as it appears in the New Testament. However, purgatory, if you want to get into a very specific, dogmatic discussion, differs from Hades or Sheol in a couple important ways. One of which is, in Catholic tradition, one can be prayed out of purgatory. Um, you can't be prayed out of Hades, at least as far as I know. I'm going through the Rolodex of Greek texts in my mind. I can't think of that happening. Once you're there, and only God can take you out when God raises you from the dead. So that's a difference. Also, the reason for ending up in purgatory, according to Catholic tradition, is different. So that is, you go to purgatory if you're not quite bad enough to go to hell, and you're not quite good enough to go to heaven. But that's not the idea of the Greek idea of Hades or the Hebrew idea of Sheol. Everybody, both the righteous and unrighteous, go to Sheol and wind up in different neighborhoods. And speaking of those different neighborhoods, last thing I'll say on this, notice that it says in Hades, he raised his eyes. That's the English translation of the NASB. Other English translations have something similar. And so what we think of in terms of is vertical separations. That is, the bad rich man is down in Sheol, under the world, and he raises his eyes up to look at Abraham and Lazarus up in heaven or something, right? But Shia, as you noted, that's not a distinction between heaven and Sheol. They're both in the same place, and a chasm. Literally in Greek, it says chasm. It means a big big separation, but it's not a vertical one. It's a horizontal one. So they're both in the same place. Unfortunately, that English translation, raised his eyes, makes us think in terms of looking up to heaven. But that's actually not what the Greek says. The Greek says that he lifted up his eyes, which is a Semitic phrase that shows up
Yeah.
over and over and over in the Hebrew Bible, most particularly and interestingly with Abraham. Um, the rich man, or I'm sorry, Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, Luke says, right? Well, there's a very famous story of Abraham. It says, and Abraham lifted up his eyes, and in the distance, far off, he saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns and offered the ram as a substitute for his son Isaac. Okay, so that is, he lifts up his eyes and sees far off. So we're talking about horizontal, right? Same thing is true here with the reference to Abraham. In Hades, the rich man lifts up his eyes and sees in the distance Abraham and Lazarus. So that's what we're dealing with here. It's not this idea of heaven, hell, and the separation that's vertical. In fact, to go back to the Catholic tradition, the Catholics are not alone in this. Protestants believe this too. But the idea is, if you're good enough, if you're righteous, or through Jesus' sacrifice, you go to heaven after you die. If not, you go to hell. Well, as we've seen today, that's absolutely not the case. It's an extreme oversimplification. The only one in heaven right now is God and Jesus, according to the letter to the Hebrews, right? Serving as an eternal high priest. In fact, in John's gospel, Jesus says, no one has been to heaven apart from the Son of Man who's been sent from heaven. But that is, heaven's where God lives, and then heaven comes down to earth at the judgment day. And everybody gets out of Sheol or Hades, and then you're separated, like in Matthew 25. So the notion that, the point of believing in Jesus or something is that you can go to heaven when you die, it's one of the greatest botch jobs in all of Christian tradition, frankly. I don't know how we came to this. I don't know how this snowball got as large as it is, but the only way that you could come to that idea is if you've never read the text.
Well, wow.
And on that bombshell,
But it's okay. It's okay, right? Because God is in Sheol when you die, and then God raises you from the dead, and then God's new heaven and earth comes down to this place, and you live eternally in the new Jerusalem with God. So it's all good. It's just a matter of semantics. Right? We're not going to run around with cloud slippers and halos and wings. It's just not the case. Jewish thoughts of the afterlife are much more physical, much more visceral, and embodied. The body is important, and your soul doesn't float up away into heaven. I could go on and on this soapbox, but I'll just leave it there, I think.
Nick, that's great. Thank you so much. And I mean, we're circling back around also to Christina's original question that we started with. How do these ideas influence Christianity? And that's a great example, what you've just explained, how the Christian beliefs are often based on Hebrew and Judaic beliefs together with Greco-Roman beliefs. And then there's some further stage in development and evolution that can take it in, may take it this way or may take it that way, or it may stay fairly close to the original ancient texts. And then we, 2,000 years later, after, first century texts at least, we look at them with different eyes, and we're influenced by one tradition or another. So it's really fascinating to go back and think about what it would have meant in the first century context, what would have been the associations in terms of the Jewish culture of the time, the Greco-Roman culture of the time, what were the allusions to the earlier Hebrew literature. I think you made a brilliant connection there with Abraham. Have you written an article on that?
I have not, but I certainly can do that.
Yeah, I
It's a
think
great idea.
I think that's a good article right there. And probably everyone in the audience is getting a great idea, a great sense of why it's a good idea to go check out your articles and your courses. Fantastic discussion there, Nick. I don't know, Cindy, were you trying to jump in as well?
nope.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. That was great. And I just wanted to ask, I mean, we've gone now about an hour 45 minutes. The only main issue I think that we didn't touch on at least has to do with judgment and resurrection kind of after Sheol. Now, do you have a few more minutes to hang on for that, or should we put that off to next time? What do you think?
Cindy, what do you reckon?
I actually do have to go. So
Okay.
I'm happy to leave the two of you to discuss it.
Well, I
Well, I
think
mean,
it's a
re-
big
And then
enough
I'll
topic.
I'll watch the recording afterwards.
Resurrection's a big enough topic. We could do an entire
Exactly.
session
Yeah,
on
exactly.
resurrection.
I think it's a big enough topic that we can put it off for another
Yeah.
time.
And it deserves its own, like, I think it deserves its own, like, us tracing that arc of development too, because that also is a really interesting idea that didn't exist, came into existence, and then got complicated. So I think it deserves to be fleshed out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for all that you've shared. I mean, it's been fascinating for me, and I'm sure it has been fascinating for the more than 300 people who have stayed on live and many others who will see the recording. I want to thank especially Sandra, who's doing everything behind the scenes to make this possible for us. And thank you to everyone who's signed in and listened and participated. Those who have asked questions, those who have just been listening. Please do go to Israel Bible Center. Check out Nick's articles, Cindy's podcast, my roundtable talks, and many, many other resources that you can find there. It is the world's largest library of courses in Jewish studies for Christians. So you can learn all kinds of things about the Jewish language, culture, context of Scripture, starting from elementary biblical Hebrew and going all the way to biblical geography and the Hebrew Psalms. So thank you once again to everyone, and we wish you shalom and blessing.
Shalom, I'm here to invite you to come with us on a journey of discovery into the Jewish context and culture that will forever change the way you read and interpret the Bible. As you slowly go through our self-paced, on-demand program in Jewish studies relevant for Christians, you will gain ability to discover the original meaning of the biblical texts. You will see the nuance hidden behind our best and faithful translations, and to interpret these ancient texts in their original meaning. At Israel Bible Center, we provide you with the state-of-the-art, simple-to-use technology. This way, you can study on your own from the comfort of your own home, even towards your certificate in the Jewish context and culture. This study will strengthen your ministry as you continue to serve God. We will guide you through our large collection of crash courses by our fascinating faculty and roundtable talks with leading world scholars. Our weekly Israel Bible magazine, as well as Israel Bible podcast that focuses on the land of Israel, will assist us along the way. We believe that the Bible does not need to be rewritten, but it needs to be carefully reread.
Click the link and register today to our wide variety of biblical courses.